Our next panel is on Bitcoin and human rights, and we have a fantastic panel. We have Jorge Jraissati, who is the president of the Economic Inclusion Foundation. We have Anna Chekhovich, who is Alexei Navalny's Anti-Corruption Foundation CFO. And we have Frank Corva, who you saw earlier, the White House correspondent from Bitcoin Magazine. Please put your hands together for Bitcoin and human rights.
Chair swivels and everything. This is exciting. Good stuff. I want to say thank you to everybody who's joined. I know we're kind of on the back end of all this, so thank you so much for coming here after lunch to this panel. I'm super excited to be here with the two people to my left, two people who I've gotten to know very well over the course of the last 2 years. And why I'm excited to be here is because these are the sorts of stages they should be on all the time. They do amazing work behind the scenes. They're not always the face of what's happening on Bitcoin podcasts, and you don't always see them everywhere, but they're doing work that is empowering people around the globe, especially those living under authoritarian regimes, both of which they have done personally. So I'll start all the way to my left, Jorge Jraissati. I hope I pronounced it right. We were just practicing backstage.
Perfectly.
Jorge is from a city in Venezuela called Barquisimeto, Venezuela. I know that because I also lived in that city. I lived there while the Chavez regime was still in power. Jorge, unfortunately, he had to flee Venezuela, but he does amazing work around the world, kind of in the name of Venezuela, but in the name of people who are living in situations like Venezuela globally. I'm going to have him introduce himself more in just a second. To his left, Anna Chekhovich. Anna worked directly with Alexei Navalny. For those who are unfamiliar with this name, this was Putin's opposition in Russia, Vladimir Putin, that is. And unfortunately, Navalny was poisoned. I guess that was 4 or 5 years ago now.
He was poisoned
multiple times, one of which unfortunately ended his life. Anna worked with him for a while. She still works with his foundation, the Anti-Corruption Foundation, and she's also done work with the Human Rights Foundation. We're going to dive into this intersection of Bitcoin and human rights. But first, I would like Jorge, if you could start, maybe give a little bit of background about what brought you into this space, what was happening in Venezuela, and just your personal experience with it all.
Thank you, Frank, and thank you for everybody, and thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it. My name is Jorge, and I joined this community, the Bitcoin community, because I had to use it. For me, Bitcoin is not an investment mechanism. For me, it was a source of freedom because I had to send money to friends, to family members, to activists, to academics, not only in Venezuela, but in other countries. So I remember asking myself, how can I do this when the banking system is so broken, especially for international transactions? And I found Bitcoin, and I started using Bitcoin. And I realized that Bitcoin is a source and a tool for freedom. And at the same time, I met people like both of you, who share my values and share the mission, which is a mission that everybody should have access to financial services. The vast majority of the world live in broken financial systems. Billions of people cannot have access to bank accounts. And as a result, they are excluded from the economy. They're not able to build wealth. They're not able to live in prosperous societies, simply because the fact that when they work, then the fruits of their labor are stolen through inflation. In Venezuela, for example, we lived 4 years of hyperinflation. That means an inflation rate of 1,000% per year. So I saw that, and that's why I realized that Bitcoin is the way to go.
Appreciate that. Anna, over to you. Just some background, again, on the work you did with Navalny and the other work that you continue to do.
Well, it's been 8 years that I work as a CFO of Alexei Navalny's Anti-Corruption Foundation. I am originally from Russia, and now I live in exile. I left Russia in 2019 because of direct political threats that I had to face because of my work. So I started working with Navalny in 2017 when he was running a presidential campaign, and we had a huge campaign in Russia. We had more than 300 employees. We were doing a big crowdfunding campaign, collecting money for our work. And since 2021. The entire organization had to escape the country, had to move because our organization was labeled as an extremist organization, and we left Russia, and now we keep operating in exile. And in our work, we started using Bitcoin back in 2016 when Navalny announced his participation in the presidential campaign, and we began collecting donations from our Russian supporters, and it was clear for us that the Russian government was going to use the banking system as a tool to attack us, because it's not possible to operate in the country when you don't have access to money, when you cannot pay salaries, or even when organizing protest rallies, we had to rent equipment, rent a stage, microphones, and we couldn't pay contractors for that just because they didn't want to accept payment from us, because they didn't want to have any ties with the Anti-Corruption Foundation, because it would put their business at risk for collaborating with us. So working without having access to money was really hard, and all of our financial transactions were surveilled by the government, and our donors were at huge risk, and they still are. And Bitcoin was always for us like a plan B. We could always keep operating inside Russia when our bank accounts were frozen, when our money was arrested. We could just use our Bitcoin savings, and we actually had to convert our fiat savings into Bitcoin as soon as we receive some donations. We prefer to convert it into Bitcoin and keep it in a safe place. Otherwise, we were constantly at risk of losing money. And since we left Russia, since we moved to Europe, now we rely on Bitcoin even more than before. First of all, because since we are an extremist organization in Russia, it's extremely dangerous to support us. If you donate to our organization from Russia, you will face up to 8 years of imprisonment. And we're a non-profit organization, and we still rely on donations. And we keep collecting donations from Russian supporters in Bitcoin. And we send money to Russia to support political prisoners, to support their families. I had to pay for Alexei Navalny funerals in Moscow. He was killed in Russian prison, and we had to organize his funeral, and we didn't have any way to pay, because Russia is now under financial sanctions since it started the war in Ukraine. And because of that, Russia cannot make any international transfers and cannot accept any transactions from abroad, because the SWIFT system doesn't work in Russia anymore. You physically cannot send money into the country. So I used Bitcoin to pay for Navalny's funeral. I use Bitcoin to send financial aid to my family. I send money to my mom, and all of the payments that we have to make in Russia for safety reasons, and just because we physically don't have any other solution, we use Bitcoin for that.
It's amazing, and I remember I spoke with your boss, I think Leonid Volkov, or someone else from the Anti-Corruption Foundation about this, and he said, yeah, most people think about Bitcoin as maybe a savings technology, which it is, and Jorge, you alluded to this, under hyperinflation, obviously Bitcoin maintaining value for people is really important, but I remember Leonid saying, like, freedom money was really the first thing. We needed this, and he talked about every other way to hold money, bank accounts, all the ways being shut down, not having access to that, and Bitcoin being sort of the only engine on the plane that still worked for them, which I think is really important. But I want to start a little bit, I'm going to go back to you, Jorge, talking about one of the problems that Bitcoin solves, and that it's a response to debanking, which really has become a central part of the authoritarian playbook. And I know we're going to get a little bit more into this. You've been doing some work with Congress, testifying in front of Congress about debanking. But can you give a little bit of a background about how common this is across the globe, what we term kind of a method of even transnational financial repression, right? If you can give a little bit of an overview of like the gravity of the situation globally, that'd be great.
Of course, yes. Besides all the benefits of Bitcoin, one is that it becomes the bank of last resort for many people who are being debanked. By debank, I mean the phenomenon in which people, organizations, companies, they lose their access to financial services without any warning, without any explanation, without any due process, and without any ability to solve the problem. As you know, there is many people who are losing their bank accounts in the US and globally, of course. This is almost like a silent crisis because most people don't want to talk about it when they lose their bank accounts. If you have a business, it can become a reputational issue. So if you don't want your suppliers, your business partners, your employees to know that you face bank disruptions. If you have an organization and you receive donations, you don't want your donors to know that you're having also these bank problems. So it's really a hidden but a growing problem. Many people are being debanked. Why do people are debanked? In the case of the US, for example, there is 3 ways in which debanking is taking place. The first one is the abuse or the manipulation of compliance rules for political reasons. As you know, the previous administration was particularly against the crypto assets industry and Bitcoin as a whole. So they start using compliance rules to make life very difficult to anybody who was associated with Bitcoin or crypto assets in general. So a lot of companies, a lot of foundations, a lot of people lost their bank accounts as a result. The second issue is the regulatory failures that the banking system is having. In the US, there is something called anti-money laundering regulation. And these regulations have become so tight, complex, vague, ineffective, that they are producing a lot of unintended consequences in the financial system. So how does this translate into debanking? If you have a foundation operating internationally, for example, sending humanitarian aid to places like Eastern Europe or to Latin America or to the Middle East, you become a compliance nightmare for banking institutions. So banks prefer to terminate these relationships with these organizations. But it's not only international foundations, it's trade companies in general, it's new technology companies, it's people that come from what they call high-risk jurisdictions. So it's happening to many people. The third element is what you mentioned, this transnational element. We have found ways in which foreign governments are able to access private banking information of people in the US. They're able to shut down accounts in the US. And they're able to use international cooperation agreements to find out all your personal information, travel information, business information, financial information that most people think is private. So most people think that your financial banking information is protected by some sort of due process, Fourth Amendment, or some sort of protection. But the reality is that it's not like that. If a foreign government or if a local prosecutor or if law enforcement wants your banking information, they can access to that. And the problem is that this is giving too much power to government in general and is allowing to the weaponization and manipulation to our own institutions. So many of these organizations in private, they use Bitcoin when they face these problems.
Yeah, let me also give an
Please.
example
Yeah.
from our work, exactly what you were talking about now. This is something that happened to the Anti-Corruption Foundation when we had to escape Russia and relocated our work into Europe, Lithuania. We had to start a new legal entity in Europe, and we started a foundation that was called Future Russia Foundation. And we really struggled to open a bank account just because in the name of our legal entity there was a word Russia. And of course, because of these regulations, it was a trigger, it was a red flag, and banks just didn't want to provide us a bank account. So we had to rename the organization into the Anti-Corruption Foundation Europe in order to open a bank account. But as you mentioned, yes, banks want to collect all personal information, all the information about your transactions. And for us, it could be very dangerous when providing information about, for example, our donors, or where if we want to send money to Russia, of course, banks would not allow us to do that because of the sanctions. So for us, the only option was to operate with Bitcoin. But because of the regulations, non-profit organizations in Europe cannot operate with cryptocurrencies and with Bitcoin. And I called personally around 50 banks across European Union, and they all denied us access to cryptocurrencies. And they told us, I found only one bank that said, okay, maybe you can convert your donations that you receive into Bitcoin, but you will have to show us all personal information of the final recipient of funds. And if it's Russian citizens, then we will block your bank account. And collecting this information, providing this information to the bank, like their passport information or any other personal information, this information can leak to oppressive governments just by their request. And those people will be in great danger, or they will face imprisonment for collaborating with us. So yeah, those regulations, they really affect people like us, they affect organizations like us, and we have no way out of this. So it's really hard, very hard to operate, especially in Europe. In the US, it's easier for us now, so we have also one entity in the US to operate more freely.
Yes, and it's very important on this issue that a lot of people from the administration have tried to find ways to solve the debanking problem. So the Treasury, the Federal Reserve, the White House issue an executive order. Also, the Senate has introduced a proposal in that matter. But they are so superficial that doesn't solve the underlying problem of debanking. And this is something that, Frank, you advocate on this regard because you are aware about it. There has to be a comprehensive and structural reforms to the Bank Secrecy Act. Many of you understand.
You can clap for that. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Thank you. There has to be, because they create this framework which became a form or a source of deep abuse, manipulation, surveillance, and a lot of problems for our economic freedom and our political freedom. So the way to solve the debanking problem is not to simply mention it on an executive order or to do some superficial changes to the way compliance is done. We need to totally rebuild the way compliance is done in the US if we want to keep the basis of our market economy, which is to protect people's property rights, private information, and again, to protect people's privacy, which we believe is extremely important.
I want to, it's a perfect, appreciate that, Jorge, and I want to talk a little bit more about privacy. Actually, I'm curious to hear a raise of hands. How many people are familiar with what happened with the Samurai case or the Tornado Cash case? Were people following this at all? Okay. You may have seen me making video after video on X. I maybe apologize for that if it was too much, but I took those cases, I covered them very closely because there's a lot at stake here. There's also a lot at stake for those who are unfamiliar with market structure. The market structure bill has a lot of really important language from what was called the BRCA, which is the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act. And this language will protect developers like the Samurai developers, like Roman Storm from Tornado Cash, for what they've done. They're developing privacy tools for people to use these tools. I was talking with Anna about this. It was either earlier today or yesterday, or no, maybe it was just backstage here, where she was saying, sometimes people think, privacy is like, people associated with like only people who want to do shady things. But for the sake of donors to ACF, the Anti-Corruption Foundation, if you're linked to the Anti-Corruption Foundation, you are now working with a terrorist organization as far as the Russian state is confirmed. So privacy tools become basically a life or death sort of situation in a situation like that and in other situations. So I was hoping you could speak a little bit more about the importance of these tools.
Yes, sure. My people are very concerned about this, what's happening with the privacy tools, especially here in the US. And actually, I recently moved to America almost a year ago, and what I experience here is very different from the part of the world I'm coming from. Here in the US, people don't take privacy seriously. I mean, I understand why, like, you don't have to hide from oppressive regimes, and you don't have to be that careful, and surveillance, government surveillance over your funds, over your bank transactions. People take it here as something normal, when in my part of the world, this is something that can put you in a great danger if they see your transactions. For example, if you are in Russia and you want to support Ukraine, and if you make any transaction to Ukrainians, you will face imprisonment for that. So we take privacy very seriously because you can end up in jail, or you can get fined, or whatever else can happen to you. And In my work, privacy is crucial. Whatever we do, it's not only about using Bitcoin. We use privacy tools like VPNs or private messengers. So everything we do must have extra layers of privacy. So just using Bitcoin is not enough. We must protect even our Bitcoin transactions because there are still ways to identify our donors, even those who donate Bitcoin to us, and especially if our donors, for example, use custodial platforms, if they use any centralized exchange platforms where they provide their personal information, those donations can be tracked, and it's very risky. So unfortunately, we cannot educate the entire country how to use Bitcoin properly. Even if we try to do that. So we discovered not that long ago, unfortunately, but we discovered that there are privacy tools such as CoinJoin, and we implemented that tool into our work. If you go to our website, you will find different ways of donations, and you can see that we provide this Bitcoin donation button that generates new Bitcoin address each time, and on the background we also implemented CoinJoin, which doesn't allow the government to track the donor, and we protect the donor with these tools, and it's very important. And now I also educate activists. I also work with the Human Rights Foundation, where I educate activists on how to use Bitcoin in their work and how to do it privately, since I have this first-hand experience, and I understand that for people like us it's a lifesaver, but unfortunately, these tools are regulated here in the country that is not facing these kind of challenges. And what we see now, that privacy tools developers are attacked by the government, and it creates this chilling effect. And we are very concerned about that, because if those tools disappear from the market, we have no other way. We only have Bitcoin right now to operate, and if we lose this, way of receiving donations, then people will stop donating to us at all. So it is crucial for us.
Appreciate that. Speaking of regulation in the United States, I think oftentimes something that I see up close is that a lot of us in the Bitcoin space, I think we question authority. So very quickly we sort of attribute things to malice, what sometimes is more a lack of education. So certain politicians, certain regulators, they just don't really understand how the technology works, maybe nor why it's important. So I want to dive in there. We're here in DC. It's a Bitcoin conference in DC. Some people in the Bitcoin space hear those words, or DC combined with Bitcoin, and they cringe. What are you talking about? We're here to separate money from state, blah, 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 blah. Not demeaning anyone by saying that, I'm just saying, but that's the rhetoric that often comes with this. I was on stage earlier talking with Mark Moss about why engage, and I maybe want to ask you that question as well, Jorge. Why are we here engaging? Why are you here engaging? Why should people be engaged with this political process? And I'll preface that by saying, maybe answer that as someone who had to literally flee their country for trying to engage with the political process, for working as an activist. What should we be keeping in mind as people who are free to engage with the leaders of our countries and to have these important conversations with them?
I mean, it's a huge privilege to be able to live in a democracy, to be able to live in a place in which you can engage in dialogue, that you can debate, that you can bring ideas, that you can try to convince people, you can build organizations, associations, movements. That's really the spirit of democracy, and that's what really allows societies to function. When you come from a country like Venezuela, in which you lost your political freedoms, you really realize the importance of protecting your democracy and engaging with your elected officials. I believe it's fundamental. People like you and I, who come from the classical liberal perspective, in which we understand that you need to separate and you need to have a strong civil society, but you need to have support from politicians. All successful industries, all successful sectors, they need to work on convincing the hearts and minds of people. And that includes policymakers, includes academics, includes journalists, the youth, etc. You need to really engage with all these groups. And I really believe that that's why also the Bitcoin community is so successful in the United States. You have been able to actually bring into the agenda, into the political conversations, how Bitcoin is a tool for freedom and how Bitcoin matters. And that's something that I deeply respect. And that's why I'm here, because that's the way to build successful movements and successful industries. A lot of people, again, complain about it, or a lot of people don't like about it. And also there is room for those kind of people. There are people who don't enjoy engaging with policymakers. They also have their role in society. And I truly believe that what makes countries prosperous, successful, is when everybody's doing their task, their duty, what they do well. So if somebody's an excellent developer, let them do that. If somebody's excellent at convincing people to join a cause, let them do that. And that's the way I think Bitcoin will continue to be successful.
Yeah, appreciate that, yeah. Great answer. I remember there was a moment, I had Anna with me on the live desk at Bitcoin 2024 last year at Nashville, and we were getting a lot of critique for the amount of politicians we had at the event, and again, totally fair critique, that's fine. And I said to Anna, I was just like, what does this look like to you? She was saying, like, the thought of something like this in Russia where you would have a potential president of your country. This is when now President Trump, who was on the campaign trail, spoke at Nashville 2 summers ago. She was just like, this would never happen in Russia. It's not a thing where we could actually like talk about this at a conference and have these conversations. So I'm curious too, from your perspective, what is it like? You're living here in the United States now. You're watching a lot of the people in the Bitcoin space that you know, including myself, engage with politicians. What are you paying attention to as these conversations are happening?
First of all, I would like to mention that I'm amazed to see how it's developing now. I mean, I started joining this kind of events, conferences, meetups around 4 years ago. I remember my first Bitcoin conference, I was speaking about Bitcoin and human rights, and most of people from the room, they just left when we just started, and I heard a lot of people saying like Bitcoin shouldn't be political, and we don't want people from politics here to speak about it. And I see this significant shift that more and more Bitcoiners start understanding that it's very important to bring politicians, to make them engaged, because there are policymakers and they can affect this technology. And it's very important to have this dialogue with the decision makers. And this is something that you can actually do here, because in countries like mine, it's not possible to do at all. Activists, freedom fighters, they don't have any access to any decision makers. There is no dialogue. If you want to say something, you just will get jailed, or you will have to escape the country if you are against the government's policies. So you are very privileged that you have this opportunity here now, and the shift is very significant. Like, it's been 4 years, and now we have these kind of events here in DC where high-profile politicians, president came to a Bitcoin conference, because everyone understands the power of this tool. Everyone understands not only that Bitcoin is not only for like regular people, it's also for freedom fighters. It helps building democracies, and we should talk about how we're going to use it for a good cause. So I'm amazed by this, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to speak to this sophisticated audience.
Appreciate that. Jorge, we've talked about this a lot. There's been a lot of, I would call them maybe aha moments where you've talked about speaking with people, anyone from maybe someone in the State Department to the Treasury to regulators to politicians, where you maybe explain the way that Bitcoin is used. You explain the dangers of debanking, the problems that it solves, whether it is debanking or inflation or something along these lines. And a lot of them just said, like, I just never had thought about it like that. So again, we sort of attribute to malice. Maybe it's the state trying to keep us down when they just don't really understand it. Maybe all they think about when they think of Bitcoin is still, I don't know, Sam Bankman-Fried or something like that. Very unfortunate association. So maybe you could walk us through some of those moments. What has it been like having a lot of these conversations day in, day out? And what sorts of maybe big victories have you had in the process?
Yes, exactly. It's something that when you come from the perspective in which your bank account always worked, and you were born, let's say, in New York, and you live in New York, and your entire life has been in New York, you never experience what it feels to be debanked or unbanked, or not being able to have tools to protect yourself financially. So you need to explain these things. You need to talk to policymakers, and they need to listen to you. And the good thing about policy and the good thing about advocacy in the US is that if you do it correctly, people listen to you. If you place your message where it has to be, policymakers follow. Many policymakers want to do good. They want to do a good job. They want to have a better country. So if you facilitate that process by bringing them with good information, they will follow. There is several arguments that I have felt that they are very effective. For example, when I tell them, look, there is many organizations in Venezuela, for instance, that they're trying to provide good job that the government should be doing, but because the government in Venezuela is highly corrupt, they are not. So you have many great NGOs. But these NGOs cannot have a bank account. These NGOs cannot receive funds through the traditional financial system. Do we want to leave these people alone? Most of them don't want to. So Bitcoin is the solution in that regard. I also explained to them the issues, like, for example, Anna was mentioning about debanking in the US or in Europe, and they get the problem. So as everything in life, it's a lot of hard work, it's a lot of commitment, and it's systematic spreading the message. This is something that we are doing, this is something that you are doing, and many people in this audience, and the fact that exactly this event is taking place is a testament to that.
Appreciate that. Anna, also, any sort of, along the way, surprises, or what would you say some of the major victories are? I think oftentimes, especially coming from what was happening under the last administration, obviously they constantly talked about this technology in an antagonistic way. A mutual friend of all of ours, Lyudmila Kozlovska, talked a lot about how it's really, really important that the United States, one of the major powers in the world, some would say the major power, but at least, you know, if we're thinking about the world in a multipolar sense, we need one of those poles to be pro this technology. So when you look at this, what do you think some of the victories are? I think oftentimes we look at like the task ahead, but what do you think are some of the major sort of wins that we've experienced?
There is a lot of debates about like whether it's good or bad that American government started adopting Bitcoin because they're going to over-regulate it, if it's good or not. But I think it's one of the major victories that we speak about Bitcoin on such a high level now, at least because it boosts Bitcoin adoption generally. And before it happened, for many years, there were lots of negative narratives about the technology, like Bitcoin is only for criminals and money launderers and whatever. And now I don't hear it that much. People realize that, so Bitcoin is also used by American government. Also, they invest and invest into treasury. And I think that it's one of the major victories of the recent time. But I think that there is a lot of work must be done yet, and what Jorge mentioned, the work we do together with other activists, such as Lyudmila Kozlovska, which is right now here in the audience. I'm very proud to mention that Lyudmila invited me and other activists to do this advocacy for Bitcoin and privacy tools. She was the first one to realize the problem, and she brought us all together, and we have been doing this advocacy on the highest levels, explaining to policymakers, decision makers, this significance of privacy tools for activists. And I had this absolutely crazy experience doing that when we were literally knocking on the doors in those cabinets, asking them, hey, do you have a minute to talk about Bitcoin? And those people who actually do this, make these regulations, they don't even know what Bitcoin is, and they never used it. And it was a complete shock for me, because those people, they regulate the technology, and they ask us, by the way, can you show me Bitcoin, how it looks like? And we literally had to teach them how to download Bitcoin wallet and send some Bitcoin to them. So it was shocking for me, and as I mentioned before, I think that the victory now is that I think Bitcoin adoption is growing, and I think that more and more people realize that it's a very important tool for freedom fighters.
Appreciate that. First, I'm going to actually stop and have everyone give a round of applause to Lyudmila as well. I didn't know that she was here, so please. Lyudmila is another I wish, honestly, if I just had a handheld mic, I would just bring her up from the audience right now and have her join the conversation. I had no idea you were going to be here, but it's good to see you. She does another person who does insanely important work behind the scenes, who you might not see on every podcast, though she's been on her fair share of podcasts, who does really, really important work preserving our privacies, who has been the victim of debanking, who has had authoritarian leaders very much crack down on her freedoms, and she has dedicated many years now to doing absolutely incredible work that has saved lives and impacted the lives of many around the world. So it's a pleasure to have her here with us. I want to go over to you, Jorge. We're going to be wrapping up soon here. So I want to do a little bit of a call to action. I think that that's important. What can people do? Oftentimes, we talked about this earlier too, people think about the government as a very monolithic thing, so like impenetrable, it's a big thing, it doesn't have any faces in it, it's just the government, I'm over here and the government's over there and blah, blah, blah. So maybe to try to encourage people to get out of that mentality, I think that might be part of what I'm getting at here, but I guess also sort of, what are some, I guess, simple but effective ways to maybe capitalize on some of the momentum that you're building and some of the momentum that Anna was talking about? And I'll sort of underpin everything I'm saying by, I think we are moving out of an era where Bitcoin was a very taboo thing. We're now moving into an era where it's just sort of like a fact of life, a macro asset, a certain technology. It's a neutral technology. We're talking about it openly. How can we sort of capitalize on that momentum? Maybe the average Bitcoiner or the average person who's an enthusiast for peer-to-peer rights, how can they get involved?
I would say that there is two major things that we need to work on. The first one is that and it's part of what this organization and this conference is doing, is that we need to really reach out to people outside our comfort zone, people that are outside the classical liberal or conservative or pro-technology crowd. You really need to go to the average person and tell them about Bitcoin. So that's, I think, one area. What I would like to emphasize is that what I feel is that the movement towards Bitcoin adoption has many strengths, but there is one issue that we really need to work on, which is in the debanking issue. I really feel that if we don't fix the Bank Secrecy Act, if we don't work to fix financial compliance in the US, if we don't make bulletproof the fact that nobody should be debanked for political reasons, that nobody should be debanked simply because they work in specific industries or in specific sectors, I really feel that we need to work on this. And this is why I'm emphasizing a lot of my time to do so, because overall, I feel that in other areas, there is great people doing great work, but in this area in particular is the weakest point that we have. So my call to action to people in the audience is that if you're interested on trying to solve this debanking issue, please reach out to me, either through media, either through Frank, either here outside the hallway, and let me know how can you support. How can you support? How can you give us a voice? Are you a podcaster? Do you have good connections? Do you want to support financially? Come to us, let's unite forces, because I really feel that this is the last point that we really need to emphasize.
Appreciate that, Jorge. And now we have about a minute and 30 seconds here. Call to action, what can the average person do to lend a hand?
Well, at some point, I started thinking, having this experience managing finances of the Anti-Corruption Foundation, having this very unique experience of working under government surveillance, what else can I do? How can I actually share my knowledge? How can I help someone else in a similar situation? So that is how I joined the Human Rights Foundation, where now I lead the educational program for activists. I lead a Bitcoin webinar for activists and nonprofit organizations, where I teach how to use Bitcoin safely and privately. And I think that here I would encourage everyone to think what you can do in your field of work, because this crowd is very diverse. There are developers, there are policymakers, there are all kinds of people here. And if your goal is not only to make money out of Bitcoin, like trading or whatever, if you want to pursue bigger goal, I would like to encourage you to think how you can boost Bitcoin adoption, what else you can do, and think about end users of this technology, and to think that and realize that this technology actually saves people's lives and provides people freedom. So maybe you can contribute somehow in your field. Maybe you can build better tools. Maybe you can just teach someone else to use Bitcoin and boost its adoption, and that would be enough.
Appreciate it. We have a few seconds left, but I want to have everybody please give them a standing ovation. And I say that because these are two people that cannot go back to their home countries because of the work that they've done to preserve freedom, privacy, the ability to live free and prosperous lives as a result of advocating for this technology and other things. So please give them a round of applause. Yeah.
Thank you, man.
Thank you so much. What an amazing panel.